Okay, so I have us near the end of chapter 6. The next judge that we're dealing with, Gideon, whose name is changed to Yerubbaal. And here it is again, Gideon is rounding up the forces to be able to attack the current oppressor, Midian and Amalek here. Okay,
We
so
haven't said the prayer yet.
I know, I'm about to do it. I was about to
Okay,
say
so
page 213, and let's say the prayer. As 213, verse 33, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so I'll read to the end of the chapter. V'chol Midian v'Amalek uvenei Kedem ne'esfu yachdav v'yavru v'yachanu be'emek Yizrael. All of Midian and Amalek and the people of the east gathered together, and they crossed over and camped in the Jezreel Valley, which is still, it's in northern Israel, right before you get to the Galilee. It's like the Midwest in terms of agriculture for America. The Jezreel Valley, that's what that is for Israel. Veruach Adonai lavsha et Gidon, vayitka bashofar, vayizaek Aviezer acharav. So just unusual terminology here. The Spirit of God dressed Gideon, or Gideon was dressed in the Spirit of God. So you don't really see that verb being dressed with God's Spirit. So you have the idea that the breath of God enters into one's nose. You have the breath of God entering one's being, but the Spirit of God being dressing Gideon or clothing Gideon. It's just an unusual metaphor. Nothing wrong with it. I'm just pointing out that we've never seen this before in the Bible, and it's a beautiful idea. It's kind of like if you picture Clark Kent going into a phone booth and then becoming Superman. It's kind of like the idea. Gideon, poof, becomes dressed in God's Spirit. And he blew a shofar, and Aviezer, it says here, was gathered together after him. Vayizaek Aviezer acharav. It's just an unusual verb there. Was mustered in the ancient Israel, Alter's translation. So Aviezer was mustered after him, right? So in other words, kind of serving as a captain of the troops. 35, Umal Achim Shalach Bechol Menashe Vayizaek Gamhu Acharav Umalachim Shalach Be'asher Uvizvulun Uvenaftali V'ya'alu likratam. So messengers were sent throughout the tribe of Menashe, or the territory of Menashe, and they were also gathered after him. And messengers were sent in the territory of Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Okay, so you have Menashe, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. So those four tribes are being mustered by the shofar to fight against Midian and Amalek. 36, Vayomer Gidon el ha'Elohim, im yeshcha Moshia biyadi et Yisrael ka'asher dibarta. Gideon said to God, uh, if you will save Israel through my hand as you spoke. So the if is just unusual. It's more like pleading. Please save Israel with my hand as you said you would do. So the beginning of the chapter, that when Gideon was called, that's what God said to Gideon that he would do. So now Gideon is calling God to do it. 37, Hine Anochi Matzig et Gizat Hatsemer Bagoren, Im Tal Yihye al Hagiza Levada, Ve'al Kol Haaretz Chorev, Ve'yadati Ki Toshia Biyadi et Israel Ka'asher Dibarta. So he's asking for a sign. Here, I will put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there will be dew on the fleece only, but the land will be, the earth around it will be dry, then I will know that you will save Israel through my hand as you spoke. So, like Gideon is saying, this is the sign I'm looking for. I'm going to put fleece down on this big threshing floor. And if there's dew just on the fleece and not on the floor itself, then I know that that's a sign, and I know that you're with me, and I can do this. 38, Vayehi chen, vayashkem mimocharat, vayazar et hagiza, vayimetz tal min hagiza, melo hasefel mayim. And so it was, when he got up early the next day and pressed the fleece together, like folded it together or whatever, then he wrung dew from the fleece enough to fill a bowl of water, a bowl full of water. 39, Vayomer Gidon el ha'Elohim, al yichar apcha bi, va'adabra achapa'am, anasena rak ha'pa'am bagiza, yehina chorev el hagiza levada, ve'al kol haaretz yihye tal. Gideon, I tell you, he's chutzpah. He now says, Gideon says to God, don't be angry at me, please, but let me just ask this one more thing. I have one more test, just one more time with this fleece. Let the fleece be dry, but the earth around it have dew. Okay, so he wants to reverse the test for the next day. It's not enough that the fleece, that God fulfilled Gideon's test by having dew on the fleece and dry earth all around it. Now he wants a dry fleece with dew on the earth all around it. 40, Vayas Elohim Cain, Balayla Hahu, Vayehi Chorev El Hagiza Levada, V'al Kol Haaretz Hayatal. So God did so that night, and the fleece alone was dry, and all the earth had dew on it. Okay, so this is fascinating, and if we were to do a study about God proving that God exists through particular tests, right? Like the classic with Moses on Mount Sinai at the burning bush. God tells Moses, look, put your hand inside your cloak, take it out, poof, it's white as snow. Put it inside your cloak again, take it out, poof, it's healthy. Put this put your staff on the ground, poof, it's a snake. Pick up the snake by the tail, poof, it's a serpent again, right? So God's telling Moses, these are the signs to prove that I exist and that you have been chosen to be the leader of the people, right? We just finished chapter 6, Marlene, 33 to 40. And if you just read it quickly in the English translation, you'll see that Gideon is asking for signs as opposed to God providing the signs and telling Gideon what the signs will be, right? So it's later in the Bible, here and other places later, in which prophets dare to ask God for a sign and to suggest what the sign should be. But there are much more instances of God telling the prophet what the sign will be. Now, there are times, so there is one prophet, Elisha, who dares to do godlike things himself. So, for example, this is a haftarah for the portion Vayera, where you have two miracles that Elisha does on his own, and that he doesn't ask God to do this. So there's no pause in the story in which Elisha's asking God, there's this poor woman here. She has no money. She's about to die of starvation. What can I do? No. He says to the poor woman, borrow a little bit of oil from your neighbor, olive oil, and then borrow all the vessels you can from your neighbors and start pouring the olive oil. And miraculously, there's enough olive oil in this little thing to fill up all the vessels around her, and she's able to sell all that olive oil and be relieved of her poverty. And then there's the ultimate miracle that Elisha performs, in that he tells this woman that she's going to be having a baby in a year's time, classic barren woman story, and she does give birth, and the child grows older and collapses in the field, sends her husband to get Elisha. Elisha comes back. So who knows how far he had to go to get him. He comes back and does what looks like CPR on this child or teen, and the child miraculously is brought back to life. So these are things, and there are other stories that Elisha does too. So and Jesus, stories about Jesus and what he does in the Gospels are all based on the Elisha stories. Okay, so we think some people would think that Jesus is the first one to be able to perform such wondrous deeds, right? Like feeding the multitudes with just a little bit
The
of
loaves and fishes is
loaves
the
and
oil. The loaves
fishes, and
and
also
fishes.
bringing Lazarus back to life. So it's just based on the Elisha stories from 2 Kings. So he's the only one of all the prophets to do things like that. The other stories are mainly God telling the prophet, this is what I need you to do, to either, dress like this to teach people a particular lesson, or just this is what I'm going to do to prove to you that I'm God. The Elijah kind of invokes God. He takes it upon himself to say, in this test of faith between the Baal priests and Elijah on Mount Carmel, to see whose God, will Baal or God consume the sacrifice. So the Baal priests, and this is the Haftarah for Kitisa, the Baal priests kind of whip themselves and dance into a frenzy and pray and sing and ask Baal to consume the sacrifice, to no avail. So it's nearing sunset. They've been doing this all day. 400 Baal priests doing this. And then Elijah comes on his altar, douses the sacrifice with water, and then invokes God to consume the sacrifice, and poof, a flame bursts forth from heaven and consumes the sacrifice. So God is willing at certain times in the Bible to be called upon by the prophet to do something, as opposed to God deciding on God's own to do something in a particular way. Yeah.
What was the time frame of Elijah?
So Elijah is like the 800s or 700s BCE. So I think it's the early 700s. So we have to do this. BC is backwards. So the like 790 on, and lesser numbers is around the time of Elijah, because the exile to Assyria is like 770s or something, like 780s, 770s. So it's before, just before that time that you have Elijah. So that's 700 and it's sort of like 2,700 years ago. If you can,
So
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what's interesting is that this competition with the gods of Baal,
Yeah,
which we saw in the Torah, in the early books of the Torah.
yeah,
I mean, that's been a consistent thing, and
right.
even now, after they've been to Israel, everything there still seems to be that sort of competition with this alternative form
Well,
of
yeah,
worship.
that's essentially one element of the Bible is to convince the people to believe in God and not in the local gods of where the people are living. So it's an anti-idolatry, pro-God monotheism message that you have throughout the Bible. So, yeah, and it's still a lesson today, a metaphor today. What is the God that we believe in today? What are the gods that we're pursuing and dancing and worshiping? Is it greed? Is it other false gods of dictators and the hate that they're spewing? All of that is considered like the idolatry of today, and trying to get people to see the light. So, seeing the stories then as a metaphor for a values driven life today is a way to read this story. And there are moments that will arise in history in which the false gods are put aside and the true God is believed in, but those moments are brief, and the moments of believing in false gods are much more substantial. Okay, so
Well,
this is,
one more question, because
go
I thought
ahead.
that Baal was the pagan god, and that there were
It's,
high priests that believed in him, or
there
that
were,
deity.
uh, there were Baal priests, yes.
But Baal was
Baal,
the ultimate.
Baal is
What
the main Canaanite god. It's just one of several.
several?
There's Asherah, there's one or two other names that escape me right now, but Baal is the main one. And yes, there were the temple in Jerusalem and the temple in the northern kingdom. The Kohanim there in both places allowed Baal worship to exist alongside the regular sacrificial system, if not to take over the regular sacrificial system and be only a Baal worship that happened in the temples. So, so that did occur, and that's what the rest of the Bible is about: is getting rid of Baal and all forms of idolatry from Israeli society, and cleansing the temple and making it exclusive for God. Okay, so let's look at the commentaries from verse 33 on, back on page 213. Assembled themselves. For the periodic marauding expeditions described in verses 31 and following, they were not organized on a warlike footing. He suggests that perhaps they planned to establish themselves there. So, in other words, where were Midian and Amalek gathering themselves, and how were they gathering themselves? Passed over, the Jordan is shallow at several points near Beit Sha'an, where the crossing was made. Pitched, namely their tents, the verb is regularly used of encampment by an army. Valley of Jezreel, named after the city on a spur of Mount Gilboa. The valley extends from Carmel to Tavor, where it branches off in three directions. The central and most important leading by Beit Sha'an to the Jordan Valley, while of the other two, one runs along Little Hermon and the other below Mount Gilboa. It has been throughout history the battlefield of Palestine. Today it is dotted with numerous Jewish settlements of agriculture and industrial workers. Yeah, it's the agricultural heartland of Israel. Okay, 2:14. Spirit of the Lord, an accession of overwhelming vigor and courage. Clothed itself with. It took control of Gideon and enveloped him as one dons a garment. Blew a horn, see on chapter 3. Aviezer, Gideon's clan, among whom he lived and over whom he ruled, was the first to rally to him, and no messengers had to be sent to him. Yeah, he was called an Aviezrite, I think, when we were introduced to him. Just a second. We have to go back a bit. I'm just looking to see in the beginning of the chapter where I can't find it offhand, but the name Aviezer was earlier in the chapter. Menashe, his own tribe, was next summoned. The western half of the tribe is meant, right? Because the eastern side of Menashe is on the other side of the Jordan. Asher, etc. Once again, Issachar is omitted, as in chapter 1. Came up, in the military sense, marched against. To meet them, namely the tribes which had already taken the field. So, 36 to 40 now. As you have spoken in verse 16, I will put, literally I am putting, the threshing floor, that is, in the winepress in which he had previously beaten wheat. At this site, he had experienced prophecy when the angel appeared to him. Right, remember the soup on the rock and the broth, whatever. Let not your anger, 1:2:15, reminiscent of Abraham's request, Gideon was not testing God, but seeking further assurance in a moment of grave crisis. The thought may have occurred to him that the ground, since it was hard, did not absorb the dew, as did the soft fleece, and so he asked for a more striking sign. Only upon the fleece. This could only happen as the effect of a miracle, because in the ordinary way, the ground would be dried much more quickly than the saturated wool by the wind. Okay, so let's see what Alter has to say about this. So we're on page 143 in Ancient Israel. So below the line there, for number 33, crossed over, the term indicates crossing the Jordan from their habitual territory to the east. Blasted the ram's horn, as in the Ehud story, this is a call to arms. I am about to place a fleece of wool. Moses too was given signs before the beginning of his mission, but the apprehensive Gideon sets up an elaborate test for a sign and then reverses its terms for a second test. And no comment here by Alter about just the unusual nature of it, that Gideon is asking for this particular sign as opposed to God saying this is what the sign's going to be. On 144, let your wrath not flare up. Gideon obviously feels he's pushing matters with God, but he nevertheless requires an additional proof that God will be with him when he leads the insurrection against the powerful Midianites. Let it be dry on the fleece alone, and on the ground let there be dew. This is a more miraculous outcome than the first test, because fleece would naturally absorb moisture that might well evaporate from the ground. Okay, so let's go on now to chapter 7. Let me just see how long the chapter is. Okay. 25 verses. So the commentary suggests verses 1 to 8 as a section, so we'll do that. So we're on 215 in our book. Vayashkem Yerubbaal hu Gidon, v'chol ha'am asher ito, v'yachanu al ein charod, umachane Midian hayalo mitzafon, migivat hamoreh ba'emek. So Yerubbaal, he is Gideon, and all the people who are with him got up, and they had camped, and they camped at Ein Charod, which is a place in Israel today. And the camp of Midian was north of him, from Givat Moreh in the valley. 2. Vayomer Adonai el Gidon, Rav ha'am asher itach, mititi et Midian biyadam, pen yitpa'er ala Yisrael lemor, yadi hoshia li. God said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me, that is God, to give Midian into your hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, like be arrogant against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. In other words, God's saying, you have too many people with you. It seems reasonable right now that you could beat Midian on your own, and it won't seem like a miracle that it won't seem as if that God was involved in it at all, in this defeat at all. So, 3, Va'ata krana ba'oznei ha'am lemor, mi yarei v'chared, yashov v'yitzpor, Mehar Hagilad, Vayashav min ha'am, Esrim u'shnayim elef, Va'aseret alafim nisharu. So now call out into the ears of the people, right? Let the people hear you proclaim, saying, who is afraid and shaking, trembling? So chared. So in other words, the ultra-Orthodox in the Jewish community are called Haredim in Hebrew. The opposite effect. So they're trembling with awe and faith of God, the ultra-Orthodox, so they call themselves Haredim. But here, Hared is used in a negative sense. They're just personally afraid of going into battle. Okay, nothing to be... there's nothing wrong with that. It's just so. This is what God says to Gideon to do: call out all the people and ask for anyone who's afraid and trembling that they should go back home, and v'yashov v'yitzpor, let them return and depart from the Gilad mountain, and return from the people. And so. 22,000 people left, and 10,000 stayed behind. So he calls, anybody who's afraid can leave now. 2/3 of the people with him left, and only 1/3 stayed behind. So that could be demoralizing. Okay, and that makes then the miracle now that they defeat Midian that much greater. So you got the strong people, or the strong of heart people staying, yes, I'm with you. 10,000 saying they are doing that. 22,000 said, okay, no thanks. It was fun to come along for the ride, but now we're getting into actually having to fight. Thanks for letting us go. 22,000 went home. 4.
Okay, wait, Jonah, sorry,
Yes.
can I just, before you go on, and
Yeah.
because this is from the beginning of the verse, the first verse, so just going back, so his name, Yerub-Baal,
Right.
or as they say for Ginon, but is Yeru, is that a prefix? Like you have Yerushalayim, we say, right? We say city of peace, so I don't know if it means anything or it's just a
Right.
coincidence.
So Yeru Baal was because here it means, yeah, it's not related to Yerushalayim. For some, if you see here, the under the resh, you got the diagonal 3 dots for the U sound, and in Yerushalayim you have an actual vav to make the U sound. So I think there Yerushalayim is more connected to the word Ir, meaning city. And here, Yeru, with the diagonal 3 dots, is more connected to fighting. So fighting against Baal. That's how he got his name. Which, if you see, you have to see earlier in chapter 6 where he got the name.
Oh, okay, yeah.
God gave him the name there. So we're just supposed to be reminded here in chapter 7 that he had gotten that name before. Okay, so verse 4 on 2:16. Lanny is here to deliver food for Kiddush tomorrow. So, verse 4. Vayomer Adonai el Gidon, od ha'am rav, hored otam el hamayim, ve'etz refenu lecha sham, v'haya asher omar elecha ze yelech itach, hu yelech itach, v'chol asher omar elecha ze lo yelech imach, hu lo yelech. So God said to Gideon, there's still too many people. So 10,000 is still too many people. Take them down to the water, that is, I guess, the Jordan River, and I will etzrefenu lecha sham. I will, the word tzadi resh fe is more like doing some kind of filtering. I will filter them out for you there, and that it will be that it's kind of like doing more than a lottery, but more like from the Harry Potter books, the sorting hat, right? You put the hat on your head to determine which of the 4 houses you're going to be going to, right? If you've read the Harry Potter books. I read them once, and this just comes to my mind. This sorting hat you put on your head, and it tells you you're Gryffindor, you're Slytherin, whatever it is. So this is what God's doing. They don't have to put a hat on their head. They go down to the water, and God is telling them, you're going to stay or you go home. Okay, so I'll say, right, but God's not saying to the person, God's saying to Gideon, this one's staying, this one should go home, right? Omar elecha, I will say to you, ze yelech itach, this one will go with you, he will go with you. And everyone who I say to you, he won't go with you, he won't go. Okay, so in other words, you bring these 10,000 people to the water, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to point to you, this one's staying, this one's going home. Okay, so 5. Vayored et ha'am el hamayim, vayomer Adonai el Gidon, kol asher yalok bilshono min hamayim, ka'asher yalok hakelev, tatzig oto levad, v'chol asher yikra al birkav lishtot. So he brought the people to the water, and God said to Gideon, everyone that laps the water with his tongue like a dog does shall be put off by themselves. And all those who like kind of bend at the knee to drink, also, it's understood, it's not said here, but will also be put to themselves. So either they lie flat and put their head in the water to drink, or they bend down at the knee and then bend over the water to drink. Okay, so two styles. Okay, are you flush with the water and sticking your head in and drinking like that? Or are you bending down on your knee and bowing over the water to drink? 6. Vayehi mispar hamelakakim biadam el pihem shalosh maot ish. V'chol yeter ha'am karu al birchehem lishtot mayim. So the number of people who were lapping the water with their hands. So apparently they would, the lapping like a dog would mean to take the water like this. So they take with their hand to their mouths. There are only 300 people. Of the 10,000 people, 300 of them did it that way. And the rest of them, 9,700 of them, did it the other way, bending down on their knee. Maybe bending down on their knee and then sticking their head in the water. I don't know. So it's either going like this with the water to their mouth, or being on their knee and then bringing their head to the water. 7. Vayomer Adonai el Gidon, bishlosh me'ot ha'ish hamelakakim oshia etchem, v'natati et Midyan biyadecha, v'chol ha'am yalchu ish limekomo. So God said to Gideon, with the 300 melakakim, the 300 lappers, doing it like this, I will save you, and I will give Midian into your hand. And all the people can go home. And let all the people go, every man to his place. Let the rest of them go home. 8. Vayikhu et sedah ha'am biyadam, v'et shofrotehem, v'et kol ish Yisrael shilach ish la'ohalav, uvishlosh me'ot ha'ish hechazik, umachane Midyan hayalo mitachat ha'emek. So they took the equipment. It says here the victuals, but the equipment of the people in their hands, and their shofars, their horns, and he sent all the people of Israel back to their tents, but he kept the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Now, okay, so let's stop there, because that's how the commentary stops it at verse 8, this one section. So just this is a bizarre way of determining who's fit to be a soldier. Those who do it with their hands to their mouths, as opposed to bending over the water and drinking like that. Okay, so back to 2:15. Back to 2:15. First, Ein Charod, literally well or fountain of Charod. The tribal name Charod occurs again in 2 Samuel 23. The location of the place is uncertain, though it was obviously in the valley of Jezreel. It has been identified with Ein Yalud, a copious spring at the foot of Mount Gilboa, and or I think it's Jalud, Ein Jalud, a copious spring at the foot of Mount Gilboa, and was probably not far from the modern Jewish settlement which has been given the name. Givat Moreh, nowadays the entire range east of Afula is known by this name, known by the Arabs as Jebel Dahi, and by others as the Small Hermon. However, since the scripture calls it Givat HaMoreh, the hill of Moreh, it is likely to refer to only one spur of this range, the volcanic hill Tel Ajul, which overtowers the ancient Endor. Too many for me. With so large a force, there was danger that the coming victory would not be attributed to God's intervention, and God did not need so many to carry out his design. See, there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or few, in 1 Samuel. Vaunt themselves for the idea, See Deuteronomy 8, Isaiah 10. Important for Israel's future as the people of God was the understanding that not by the might of numbers or the strength of arms, but only through divine aid was their salvation made possible. Make proclamation. This is the general procedure in an optional war. In a mandatory war, it's not recited. In this case, however, Gideon was expressly commanded to make this proclamation to diminish his forces. Depart early. The verb safar is otherwise unknown. The rendering given connects it with the Aramaic safra, morning. Others connect it with sephriah, a crown, denoting something which goes around the head. Hence, here we would render go around. We'll see how, let's see what, how Alter translates it. He says turn around. Yeah, okay. Mount Gilead, the most plausible explanation of the topographical difficulty created by the mention of this mountain, which was in Transjordan, is that as some of Gilead's descendants lived on the western side of the Jordan, there may have been a mount called by that name in the Canaanite portion of Menashe's territory. The Arabic name for Ein Harod, Ein Jalud, and Nahar Jalud for the river flowing out of it are reminiscent of this name. Yet too many, and must be still further reduced if God's purpose was to be served. The water, one of the wadis in the neighborhood, perhaps the well of Harod. No mention is made of a river, though some commentators take it for granted that the test was made by the bank of a river. Try, the verb saraf, signifies to remove dross from a precious metal by smelting. Hence, remove the elements unfit to carry out the divine plan. 217, Lapith. The text, the text uses an onomatopoeic root, lakak, similar to the English lick. The criterion between the chosen and the rejected was the act of kneeling, which those who lapped the water avoided. Boweth down, literally shall kneel. Ralbag considers that they who knelt were indolent, whereas the others were energetic. Kimchi offers two explanations for the rejection of the men who went down on their knees. They betrayed the habit of genuflection, which they had acquired in their worship of Baal, or they were accustomed to worship their reflection in the water. It is unlikely that the choice of those who lapped rested on the fact that they were men inured to warfare, whose drinking in a more erect posture indicated that they knew how to guard against a surprise attack by the enemy. The selection, as appears from the context, was not to discover the men of physical fitness and bravery. Josephus draws the opposite inference. Gideon was to esteem those who bent down on their knees to be men of courage, but for all those that drank hurriedly and noisily, to think that they did so from fear of the enemies. The miracle of the victory would be magnified if the battle had been fought by the least fit from the military point of view. Putting their hand to their mouth, they scooped up some water in the palm of the hand and lapped it. The food and horns of the rejected men were taken from them for use of the small band that remained. Victuals, the Hebrew noun has the absolute state, which Kimchi regards as equivalent to the construct. This grammatical construction is found elsewhere in the Bible. Doesn't matter. Horns, to be sounded in the battle charge. Okay, so that's 1 through 8. Here, let's look at ancient Israel for this. Page 145. The troops that are with you are too many. One suspects that behind this tale of a test that eliminates the vast majority of the fighting men, there may lie a historical memory of a small group of guerrillas that defeated numerically superior Midianite forces in a surprise attack. Turn around. The verb sadi, pei resh, is unusual and the meaning uncertain, but there is a noun derived from this root that suggests going around. Whoever laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps. The point of the first of the two winnowing procedures sending home whoever is afraid, is self-evident. This second elimination procedure is at first blush peculiar because similarity to a dog, in general a reviled animal in the biblical world, might not appear to be a recommendation for a good soldier. The lapping of the water, as the next verse clarifies, is not done by putting face to water source, but rather by scooping up water in one's palm and then lapping it. The fighters who drink in this way remain alert and ready for combat even as they drink, unlike those who kneel to drink. Perhaps the feral and dangerous connotations of dog in Hebrew usage are also invoked here. Of the troops in question would have to be those who were sent back, leaving their provisions and ram's horns, which in this context serve as battle horns, behind. Okay, so
It's interesting that Alter doesn't make any reference to the fact of kneeling and its genuflection
Right.
relative to kneeling at Baal. I mean, that's an interesting idea
Yes.
that if they're so used to kneeling like that, that maybe
right. So the medieval commentators are putting in the religious element to it, and perhaps comparing it to idol worship, whereas Alter is not necessarily focused on that. He's focused on the military aspect of it. Okay, so let's do 9 to 14, actually, not 9 to 15, 9 to 14. So back on 2:18. Vayihi balayla hahu, vayomer elav Adonai, kum reid b'machaneh kina tativ biyadecha. So that night, God said to him, get up and go down from the camp, because I've given them to you. 10, Ve'im yarei ata laredet, reid ata ufura na'archa el hamachaneh. But if you're afraid to go down, go with Purah, your servant, down to the camp. 11, V'shamata ma yedaberu, va'achar techezakna yadecha, v'yaradata b'machaneh, v'yered hu ufura na'aro el ketzei hachamushim asher b'machaneh. And listen to what they say, and then your hands will be strengthened, and you can go down to the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went to the edge, or the outer edge of the armed men who were in the camp. Umidyan u'va'amalek v'chol b'nei kedem noflim ba'emek ka arbe larov v'li g'maleihem ein mispar ka chol sha'al sifat hayam larov. And Midian and Amalek and all the people of the east fell in the valley, or were fallen in the valley like locusts. That's how many there were, and their camels. Their infinite number of camels, like the sand on the seashore. That's how many there were. So there. Many people of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east, and camels. 13, Vayavo Gidon, Vehine ish misaper l'reyehu chalom, Vayomer, hine chalom chalamti, Vehine tzilil lechem seorim, mitapech b'machane Midian, Vayavo ad ha'ohel, Vayakehu, Vayipol, Vayahavchehu lamala, V'nafal ha'ohel. So Gideon came, and there was a person telling his friend his dream. And he said, this is the dream I dreamt, and there's a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp, the Midianite camp, and it came to the tent and smote it that it fell, and turned it upside down, and the tent lay flat. So this Midianite is dreaming about a barley cake rolling into the camp, able to turn a tent upside down. 14, Vaya'an re'ehu vayomer, ein zot bilti im cherev Gidon ben Yoash, ish Yisrael, natan ha'elohim biado, et Midyan, ve'et kol hamachaneh. So the other guy, the Midianite, who the other Midianite was sharing the dream, says to this guy who just told him the dream, this is none other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given into his hand Midian and the entire camp. So in other words, Gideon is there eavesdropping with his servant Purah, and he hears one Midianite sharing a dream to another Midianite, and the other Midianite solves the dream by saying that it's not a barley cake, but Gideon who's going to kill all the Midianites. So it's just interesting how the story is playing out, that this is how God is letting Gideon know that the war is going to be won. The battle is going to be won. Okay, so let's look at the commentary here, back on 218 on the bottom. The same night, after the selection of the 300, arise, get thee down. The command was not to reconnoiter, but to attack the enemy forthwith. This is indicated by the use of the preposition bait, translated upon the camp, which denotes an assault, instead of to the camp in the next two verses. If thou fear, despite his trust in God, Gideon displayed an understandable hesitation. He had never before led a warlike expedition, and his army was small, ill-armed, untrained, and inexperienced. Shall thy hands be strengthened? The phrase occurs again in 2 Samuel. Armed men. The term chamushim is obviously connected with the numerical chamesh, 5, and occurs elsewhere in the sense of men in fighting order. It has been defined as groups of better armed and disciplined soldiers stationed in advance of the army to receive the initial assault, or the whole force was grouped in 5 divisions, namely the vanguard, the center, the 2 wings, and the rear. Okay, 219, lay along, literally we're falling, an expression of camping, as in Genesis 25. It may be an expression denoting their imminent downfall. As the sand, etc., this is doubtless said not of the camels, but the entire enemy host. 13, as Gideon approached the camp unnoticed in the darkness of the night, he overheard a soldier telling his comrade a dream he had had. It had significance for Gideon because dreams were believed to presage future events, especially in this case since Gideon was divinely instructed concerning it. Cake, the word salil in this sense occurs only here, and is usually explained as a circular cake, probably flat and baked hard on ashes, hot stones, or a small stove. Such can still be seen among the primitive Arabs. Barley, an inferior grain, half the worth of wheat. It may have symbolized for the dreamer the impoverishment of Israel or the inferiority of Gideon. Alternatively, the entire dream of the cake overturning the tent was an allusion to the weak Israelites defeating the powerful Midianites. The rabbis take this as symbolic of the Omer sacrifice on Passover. In the merit of this mitzvah, the Israelites would defeat the Midianites and their allies. So it might have been that time of year. Rashi is saying from the Midrash, right? Because it's a barley grain that is waved, an omer. That amount of barley was waved between Passover and Shavuot, and perhaps that's the time of year. So why the reference to a barley cake as opposed to anything else that the dream could have referenced? The tent, that is the center of the camp, where the tents stood, surrounded by the armed men who were at the edge of the camp. A man of Israel, this follows Ramban. Mitsudat David, however, explains it as the great and prominent one. Well, man of Israel is literally how Ish Yisrael is to be translated, but in other words, other commentators are suggesting it's the Great One in Israel. Okay, so let's see what Alter has on these verses. So we're on 147. Loaf, the meaning of the Hebrew tsalil is, oh, wait a second, I'm sorry. This was back to 146, verse 10. If you're afraid to go down, God has already experienced Gideon's hesitancy in the 2 miraculous signs Gideon asked of him. Your lad, the all-purpose noun na'ar, in this context clearly indicates a function like attendant or even armor-bearer. Like locusts in multitude, beyond numbering, like the sand that is on the shore of the sea. This repetition of the vastness of the Midianite forces is an obvious counterpoint to the bare 300 men whom Gideon now leads. The Hebrew writer evinces a special fascination with the numerous camels, the unfamiliar mounts of the Midianite marauders. Loaf, the meaning of the Hebrew tsalil is disputed. Some interpreters link it to the root tsadi lamed lamed, which means to make a ringing noise, and thus understand it to have a sense like commotion or noise. Rolling noise, however, is a problematic notion. Many medieval Hebrew commentators derive it plausibly from tseli, roast, construing it as a term for a round, flat loaf baked over coals, which in fact is how Bedouin to this day make their pita. It remains a puzzle as to why bread, and specifically barley bread, is the instrument of destruction in the dream, other than its being totally unexpected in this function, like Gideon's strategy with the horns and the torches. It might be linked with the first image of Gideon threshing grain. Okay, we'll stop here. It's 10:29. We'll continue next Friday. Have a good rest of the day, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom. Thank you.